Today we're going to look at adding custom actions to the right click. We're going to be replacing the context menu. The goals that we have for this, we're going to copy the double click actions, add settings to preferences and an end panel, and limit the pen or mouse touch input. We don't want to lose the context menu, so it's going to be an either or. So let's take a look at this. We're going to be using Blender 3.22. This will work with any version 2.93 and up. So let's take a look at what we're going to be copying first. Double click right now is available in the viewport options on the end panel. We can toggle it on and off right here. And by default, it's set to full screen, whatever active area you're working in. We've got a couple other options like transfer mode, toggle touch view, and local view, but I prefer using this for full screen. And what I plan to do is use transfer mode as the default right click action. It's not useful in object mode, but when you're in sculpt, it makes it easy to toggle between objects in the scene. So let's go ahead and get a cube in the workspace, and then we can see how this works. I'll go into edit mode first, switch to transfer mode, and if we double click, it switches between them. Let's go to sculpt mode, and again you can see it easily switches between the two objects. This also works in the various paint modes as well, so you can double click on them to switch which one you're painting on, and so that'll give us two easy ways to switch between them. Now the other thing is that I want the mouse or the pen second button to do this, so we're going to have to add an option to say whether the mouse or the pen should trigger this. That way when we right click, we'll still get that relevant context menu based on what mode we're in. Okay, so let's take a look at the code we'll be working with. Let's get to our operators, and we want to find the double tap action operator. It's this guy right here. So operators are the commands that get run inside of Blender to interact with various things in the application. This operator right here is going to take our user input and it will trigger an action based on settings in our preferences. And every operator has a handful of functions that are predefined. The ones here that we're going to look at are going to be execute, invoke, and poll. First off, when you try to fire an operator, it's going to check the poll function. Now, if you don't have anything set for this, it's just going to assume it can work anywhere and it'll run. If you define the poll, you can limit it to different context areas within the application. So here we're limiting it to node editor, view 2D, view 3D, and the image editor modes. We're also limiting the context type to window. Basically, this needs to be a visual space within the application, not a menu or a panel. Well, let's test that real quick. We double click, we're expanding. Now let me do that in the menu. You see it's not actually having that effect. Same if I do it up here. It has to be done in the actual window space. Let's try it for over here in the console too. So that's not the kind of workspace that this supports. What about if we go to the node editor, geometry node editor, double click, and yeah, see it's getting rid of the console. Cool, perfect. Texture node editor also works. Not too bad. Let's go back to the code. So that's poll. Poll limits where it can work. Next, let's talk about execute. So execute is where the bulk of your action is going to happen. Execute actually commits the changes to your scene. In this function, we are getting our settings. This is actually checking the add-on preferences. And then the first thing it does is says, is double click enabled? Can we double click? If not, we want to return pass through. And we actually do pass through a couple of times, or we do finished. So what's the difference? Well, you can do pass through or you can do cancel, and that means don't do anything. Pass through allows a different action to happen from this user input. If you said cancel, nothing happens. If you do pass through, whatever action would happen instead of our new right click action is going to happen. Okay, next. So we've got some magic here. We're taking a string that's text, and we are going to split the string based on a period into the OP variable. So OP becomes a list of words, and then we're going to check BPY ops, which is the operator list inside of Blender, for part of this variable, and then we're going to look in that variable for an operator that we can run, and we're triggering invoke default. That's a little complicated. Okay, well, let's find out what we're splitting. Let's go to our settings, and we need to find the double-click mode right here. So this is an enumerated property. An enumerated property is a list of options. And we're looking at double-click items. Well, here is double-click items. We see object.transfer-mode, view3d.toggle-touch, view3d.local-view, and screen.screen-full-area. So these are the different operator commands that we can run from double-click. And we'll use the same ones for right-click as well. So you notice they have a dot in the middle here, and our operator is splitting it based on that dot. Well, here in our operator, we actually have that BLID name, view3d.dt action. So this is just a shorthand for finding your function and then calling it remotely. So we use that for all the different key commands that you can do. When you map a keybind, you're going to map it to this name. So this is just doing the exact same thing, but through text. Okay, cool. After that, we run finished. It means that there weren't any issues and we had success running our operator. Awesome. Let's look at invoke next. So invoke happens when your operator is called from user input. The main difference between execute and invoke is that this comes with an event trigger. Here, the event argument includes information like what button was pressed, if any extra things like Shift, Control, or Alt were also pressed. If you're using a pen, it also includes the pen pressure. So we can use this to do a number of things like filtering out what kind of input was used to trigger this action. And here you see we're actually doing that. We've got a handful of if statements checking the event type, pressure, and value. After that, if we're done checking all of these and they're successful, we're going to do self.execute with the context, and then we return finished. You want to return finished from invoke and from execute. Otherwise, you're going to get an error inside of Blender. Wonderful. What are we going to do? Well, first we wanted to copy this. So let's do that. Let's select all of it, and we're going to paste it. Now we have double tap action, double tap action. We need to split this out and make it right-click action. So right-click action, easy. Okay, now we need to update the rest of this. So let's get the description updated as well. Right-click shortcut. Okay, we'll want to change the ID name because we don't want to have a collision with the other name. So we'll call it RC action. And we want to update the label as well. Okay, cool. Now let's go down to invoke and we need to update this as well. We aren't going to check pin because both the pen and the mouse will actually fire a right mouse event. Actually, let's get rid of this too. Okay, the rest of this can stay for now. Okay, so we've copied our operator. Now we need to add it to the keymap. Let's open our input list. This is a bit complicated because the touch input add-on is adding in left mouse overrides in a lot of places in the app, but we don't really need to worry too much about most of this file. Since we've already got a double click action, we can just copy that and change it to right click. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a right mouse to our constant list. This isn't super important, but it is actually just because I'm lazy and don't want to keep typing in left mouse, right mouse everywhere. So I just made constants that represent that. Okay, now we need to find the double click, which is right here. And we are going to copy these lines. And now we need to change it from DT actions, which was our double tap, to RC, right click actions. We need to change L mouse to R mouse, and D click now needs to be press. And now it's added to the keymap. Great. Now there's one thing left to do. When you create a custom operator, the application doesn't know about the operator until you register it. So we need to do that in the init module script. Let's go ahead and open that. Now you see I have a couple of inits here. We're going to go to the primary one for all of our custom classes. So that's under lib init. Now first we need to import it. So here we have view 3D OT double tap action. We need to add it somewhere around here. It doesn't really matter. View 3D OT and there. Perfect. Now we need to add it to our class list here. And this will automatically go through each of these classes and do the registration step. So I just need to add the text in here. And right click action. Easy, just like that. So it's done. Okay, so I'm going to push this to the application. I'll need to restart Blender and then we can try it. So now I've got Blender open. Let's give it a shot. Let's try double click first. Okay, so double click is doing the full screen. Let's right click. Right click also does it. Great. Let's change that to transfer mode. And we need to add another object to the scene again. And let's move it out of the way so it's easier to click on. And again, we'll switch to edit mode because transfer mode does not work in object mode. So here, right click, right click, right click, right click, works perfectly. Double click also does the same. Cool. So we've got duplicated functionality. Now we need to separate the two because we want double click to do full screen and we want right click to do transfer mode. So let's get started on that. We need to go back to our code and now we need to update our preferences. Preferences are unique to your add-on and they're able to store custom variables that you may use for different actions and functionality within your tools. My settings have a lot of options in them. Let's just stick with the double click stuff. So we've got a Boolean property and an enum property. We talked about what the double click items is for the enum property. Enum is just a list of things. Boolean is simple true false. It's on or off. And that's really all it takes for the double click functionality. So let's duplicate these. And instead of enable double click, let's enable right click. And instead of double click mode, we'll say right click mode. And we also need to change the name labels here. Great. Let's change our default too. So we wanted object.transfer mode. That's an underscore, not a hyphen. Cool. Okay. Settings are updated. Let's go back to our operator. We need to change what variable this is looking at. Let's see, in execute, we want to look for enable right click. So let's update this. And we also want to check right click mode. Okay, and that's done. Easy. Let's go back into Blender and we will give it a shot. Okay, so let's go into edit mode, and if we right click, we're now transferring mode with a right click. Great. And double click expands the view. There's one thing missing. We wanted to separate the input so that right click on the pen will do context menu and right click on the mouse will transfer mode and be able to toggle it between them. So we need to make one more change in the settings, and then we need to expose these options in the UI. Let's go back to code. All right, so let's start in the settings. And what we need to do is replace enable right click with an enum property. Enum property. And we're gonna say right click source. So where is this right click coming from? We need to add another thing. We've got items. And items is a requirement of the enum property. So we need to make a list. And let's format the code correctly real quick. Now we need to make our list. And the list is actually a set of tuples. A tuple is defined using a couple of parentheses. And inside of that, they use a specific definition structure. So the tuples you have to use for this, you're going to have 3 values. They're going to have an internal identifier, they're going to have a label, and they're going to have a description. So let's set the identifiers first. We've got none, which is going to disable the input. We need mouse. Oop, there we go, mouse. And we need pen. And here, let's go ahead and give them a label. So disable, mouse, and pen. Okay. So here we're going to disable right click override. Use right mouse, long press. And long press is when you hold your finger down, that activates right click as well. And then the other one, pen button 2. So most pens are going to support that. Alright, we need to change our default too. So our default is set to true, and true is not an option in our list, so let's go ahead and change this to mouse. Alright, there we go. Perfect. Okay, so we've added this and we've gotten rid of enable right click. Now we need to change the variable name. So let's call it right click source. Perfect. Okay, now we need to go back to our operator and update it to use this new variable. We got this if statement here that says if not settings.enable right click. Remember we changed that, so let's get rid of the not first. And we need to update what property we're looking at. So let's change this to right click source. And we need to say if it's equal to none. And again, none is what we want to use when we disable the functionality. Okay? So now we need to switch between mouse and pen. Where do we do that? Well, remember I said when you trigger invoke, that takes a look at information on what event triggered the function call. In here, we're looking at event pressure not equal to 1. Well, earlier I said event pressure represents how hard you're pushing the pen down. So we can use that to see if it's a mouse click or a pen input. So if it's 1.0, that means that it's your mouse. So we're going to expand on this and we're going to use it as part of our filter for pen and mouse input. First off, let's copy this line and we're going to add it inside of invoke. And now we need to check what mode we're looking at. So here we'll say and settings dot right click source equals right. Okay, so we'll set that to mouse. And here we're saying if event pressure is not equal to 1, which is mouse, and the setting is mouse, we want to pass through. So if we want a mouse event and we're seeing pen interaction, ignore it. Okay, so let's copy this, paste it, and now we want to invert this statement. So if it is equal to 1, but our right click source says pen, we want to ignore that. Okay, cool. The last thing, I think I want to bring this down to invoke, just so we can keep all of these checks in the same place. And I think we're good to go on this. All right, cool. So we're in sculpt mode. Let's double click. Okay, expand is still working. All right, now we're gonna right click. Right click, right click, right click. Let's use the pen. So pen right click is bringing up the context menu like it's supposed to. Great. We're still missing one thing, and that would be access to change this in the UI. We need to update our panel. So let's go back to the code. Alright, so when you've got add-on preferences, inside of that class you'll also be given a draw function. And in the draw function you can set up your preferences UI. So this is pretty complicated because I have so many variables, but we're just going to focus on one section of it. So we're going to focus right here. So we've got enable double click and double click mode. So let's go ahead and copy these and paste them. Actually, let's see. Since we have two enums, we're going to use this copied out. And let's say right click source first, and we also want to do right click mode. Okay, so this will give us the ability to change it. It's going to be pretty ugly, but that's okay. We just want to make sure it works. Okay, and here we have tool settings, right click source, and right click mode. Great. So we can say mouse or pen and disable. We can also set what it does. So let's first try disable. Okay, right click, that's context menu, great. Let's switch it to mouse, right click, great. Let's change it to pen, right click, context menu still there, cool. Let's try it with the pen. Okay, so pen, right click, great. We'll change it to mouse, pen, right click, context menu shows. And let's set it to disable. Great, okay, right click, right click, perfect. So that's everything we wanted to do with it. I'm gonna clean up the menus a little bit and check back in when it's finished. All right, so I've gone through and I've made actually a lot of changes. So let's take a look at our end panel. I reorganized everything based on what context it is. So control zones didn't change. Viewport options is separated out. We've got right click actions here, and we have input source, none, mouse, pen, and then what action to do. Double click action just is a toggle on and off, and then what action it does. And then also the gizmo bar has its own section as well, so you can change the gizmo bar here. And tool options, which is fairly limited right now, just subdivision limit. But I'll add some more things to that when I get more gizmos built out. So yeah, let's take a look at preferences too. Okay, so preferences got about the same treatment. We've got input options, right click actions, double click actions, and these are all tied together. So if you make changes here, it's going to show up in the end panel too. It's all modifying the same settings. Yeah, so cool. Now, if you guys already have the add-on, go ahead and download the latest update. This is going to be available as soon as this video is released. If you don't already have it, you can pick it up on Blender Market or Gumroad. Links are going to be in the description. If you'd like to help out with development, or you just want to see the source code for it, the link to GitHub will be down in the description as well. Leave a like and a comment to support the channel. Subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, and I will see you in the next one.